Hi, Professor. For this assignment, I chose to do Shakespeare in the Bush by Laura Bohanna. This assignment was really eye-opening because it demonstrated how people from different cultures can interpret the exact same story based on different worldviews. The main idea of this article by Laura traveling to Africa, believing that Shakespeare's contained universal truths that everyone would understand. However, when she tells the story to the Thai people, they interpret the characters' decisions and events very differently than she expected. Instead of accepting her interpretation, they explain the story according to their customs, traditions, and beliefs. And this experience teaches Bohanna that culture and worldview strongly influence how people understand meaning. And the article illustrates the impact of worldview interpreting cultural meanings, and how worldview shapes the way people see right and wrong, family relationships, authority, marriages, and even death. While Bohanna viewed Hamlet through a Western perspective, the Thai people viewed it through their own cultural experiences. Um, Neither group was simply misunderstanding the story. They were interpreting it according to their values they learned throughout their lives. And this reminded me that understanding of event is often shaped by culture without us even realizing it. One example is in the article by Bohanna's initial belief that her interpretations of Hamlet was correct or universal interpretation. She assumed that everyone would understand the story just the same way. And she believed that she viewed Shakespeare as timeless and universally understood. However, her worldview caused an overlook in how much culture influences interpretation. Um, as this conversation continued, she realized that her own assumptions were just culturally influenced as those of the Thai people. This story also challenges the idea of our own cultural views that are normal or best. It shows the way that feels natural to one culture, but it can seem unusual to another. Um, every culture develops its own customs, beliefs, and ways of understanding the world. Instead of assuming our own perspective is the standard, we should recognize that other cultures have a more logical and more logic, I think, and wisdom that deserves respect. One tradition in my own culture is gathering with my family after church meals, especially during holidays or special occasions. For me, it represents love, community, and spending just time together. However, for some other cultures, it might seem like these large gatherings are unnecessary or overwhelming. If they come together from culture or values, more individual, or from a private family time, their worldview can lead them into interpret the tradition differently, even though neither perspective is necessarily right or wrong. One best practice for communicating across cultures is to approach conversations with humility and curiosity instead of making assumptions. I think the best thing to do is asking respectful questions and listening carefully, which allows us as humans to understand another person's perspective. In the article, Bohanna's would have learned more quickly as she expected different interpretations instead of assuming. Everyone would agree instead of everyone assuming or agreeing with just her. Her experience reminds us that effective communication begins with recognizing that our own worldview is only one way of seeing the world. A personal experience that relates to this happened while I was working with children at the church. With different backgrounds, there's just so many kids with different backgrounds, and sometimes I notice that certain children have different types of behaviors that one family considers respectful, but the other family doesn't quite understand, especially the children, with growing up in this different cultural backgrounds. At first, I could see it could be easy to assume one approach was correct, but I learned that many of these differences come from cultural values rather than disrespect. This is similar to the article because both solutions show how different worldviews can influence how people interpret actions and intentions. The biggest lesson I learned from this article is how worldview influences nearly every part of communication. We often assume that our interpretations and objectives, but they are shaped by our culture, our experiences, and beliefs. As a Christian, I believe that this lesson is especially important because building relationships with people is just and different from people from different backgrounds requires humility, and it requires compassion and willingness to listen before making judgments, and understanding that another person's worldview also allows us to communicate with better and greater respect and reflect Christ's love more effectively. But thank you for watching my presentation, and many blessings.